Hi, friends, and welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Welcome back, everyone, to the Heartful Parent Podcast. How are you? How are you? Our summer is coming to an end here. Some of you I know have kids who are already back in school, and some of you are like me, are just soaking up those last couple of weeks of summer. Wherever you are in that, I hope it's going well, and that the start of the school year, if you've got school-aged kids, is off to an amazing start, or will be off to an amazing start. I took a good portion of the summer off. And so we had some episodes replay from the summits that I've hosted. I did some solo episodes, but I'm really excited to dive back in this fall, starting now with some really phenomenal guests for you on the Heartful Parent Podcast, and more of the amazing content that I know, if you are a repeat listener, that you've come to expect. We've got some really good stuff coming your way, and today is a great starting point. So today I am welcoming Tosha Schore to the podcast. Tosha is the founder of Parenting Boys Peacefully. And I just want to stop you. If you are the parent of a girl and you just heard that title, don't shut this podcast off, because even if you are raising girls, as I am, right? I am not parenting boys. You have boys in your life that matter. You have boys who are interacting with your girls. And what Tosha shares here, I think, first of all, is universal. Much of it, right, applies no matter the gender of the child that you are raising. But it certainly, the way that our boys are raised in our world and in our culture impacts the ways that our girls get to function in the world. So Tosha's going to dive into that a little bit, but I just wanted to say that don't stop listening if you're parenting girls. This is still for you. So Tosha is the founder of Parenting Boys Peacefully, and she's, like me, a parent coach, where she is on a mission to create a more peaceful world, but she's doing it one sweet boy at a time. She is the co-author of Listen, 5 Simple Tools to Meet Your Everyday Parenting Challenges. You can find the link for that in the show notes. And that book that she co-authored with Patty Whitfler has been translated into 5 languages. Tosha works with parents to care for themselves, connect with their boys deeply, set limits lovingly, and play wildly. And she's even been featured on Dr. Shefali's Parenting Mastery Summit, Go Zen's Anger Transformation, and Listen Up Summits. She's also, by the way, been a part of the Safe Parenting Summit in 2024. And she's spoken to audience at the Institute for Child Psychology, the Diversity in Parenting Conference, the Davidson Institute, Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, and a boatload of podcasts. Her wisdom, thank goodness, is being shared far and wide, because, as I said, it impacts all of us. And whether you are raising boys, girls, or even non-binary kids, or anybody, any combination of those, today's podcast is for you. So without further ado, Tosha Schore. Tosha, welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me on, Christy. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, the last time that we connected, you spoke at the Safe Parenting Summit, and I knew then that the work that you do and the message that you're putting out in the world was one that kind of needed to be shared even more broadly than in the summit. So I'm thrilled to be talking about this today. Obviously I read your bio, but I would love to have you kind of explain a little bit about your journey. And, in college, you had a focus on women's studies. You were and continue to be a feminist, as am I. Even with all, I know that's these days feels like a bit of a fraught term, a lot of negative press around that. But I'm curious how you go from that to being an advocate for boys and setting up your business and your work and your life's mission around advocating for our boys.
I know it seems unrelated to many, but my short response would be that it's one and the same, that advocating for our boys, sometimes despite their behaviors, is an act of feminism, and that when our boys thrive and do well, we all benefit, including girls and women.
Yeah.
So that's my short answer. The longer answer of how I got here is really a personal story. I mean, I grew up with my mom. I was in the San Francisco Bay Area in California in the 70s and the 80s, and very active in the women's rights movement and protesting and the, girl power, and we can be whatever we want to be and do whatever we want to do and have all the rights. And it was a really empowering time. And I felt like it, propelled me out into the world, feeling strong and like I could make anything happen. And it was exciting. And I went to college, and like you said, I studied women's studies. And well, fast forward, I ended up getting married and having kids. And there was a story I like to tell about kind of a pivotal moment when I was pregnant with my first one, when I just woke up one morning and suddenly had this realization that I could have a boy. And I kind of freaked out. I was like, oh my God, like, what if I have a boy? And so what do I do? Like, I call my mom because we're the dynamic duo and this is what I do. And so I called my mom and I said, well, Mom, what if I have a boy? And there was just radio silence on the other end of the phone. It felt like a year. It was probably a few seconds. But in the end, she said, don't worry, Tasha, we'll figure it out. And it's kind of funny, but it's also kind of sad because ultimately, I think my response, or my sort of sudden fear that arose, was really the result of the paradigm that I had, sort of the dark side of the paradigm that I had grown up with, which is that men and boys are the bad guys and they are the problem. Not that patriarchy is the problem, which I still truly believe, but actually, men and boys are the problem. And what if I had one? Then what was I going to do? And so not only did I have one, but I went on to have three, right? So then I'm in a situation where
that is karma if there ever was, right?
Right? Yeah. So then I'm in the situation where I've got these three boys who I love more than anything on the planet, right? And they're, in my worldview, the bad guys. Well, that just doesn't work. So I knew they weren't the bad guys, and I had to figure out what I was going to do about this. So that sort of began my investigation. And things got harder, I would say, because sometimes my boys would behave in ways that were sort of the epitome of all the things that we don't like about boys and men, right? Using their power and their loudness and their physicality to overpower, for example, to get what they want. And that was very triggering. And I had to figure out, like, what am I going to do about this? Because I want to raise emotionally intelligent men. And so essentially I just shifted my perspective to the positive and thought, gosh, well, I've got an opportunity here. I've got these three little ones, and not that I'm going to change them from who they are, but what would happen? It was sort of like a real-time experiment, right? What would happen if, rather than assuming that they were the bad guys, what would happen if I assumed that they were good? And like sometimes they have these yucky behaviors, and those weren't okay. We'd have to deal with those. But if I didn't lose sight of their goodness, what kind of men then could I raise?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the beginning of the mission. And then I just discovered that there were so many parents out there terrified because of their boys' behaviors and because of the way that the world responded, whether that was teachers or coaches or neighbors or family. But the way that they reacted to their boys' behaviors with fear and worry and harshness, that they needed some hope, they needed some support. And so I decided, well, who better to create that than me? I'm going through it too. So that was kind of how the journey began.
I love it. And I have to say your mission resonates with me, and the connection that you've made between that feminist piece and our boys just resonates so thoroughly with me because, as a parent of two daughters, I don't have the privilege of raising boys. And it's funny because I wanted girls. I felt comfortable with girls. And then when I found out I was pregnant the second time with a girl, I was like, I was excited. And I thought, oh, because I knew we were only having two. And I thought, but now I don't ever get to try to raise a boy. But it resonates so clearly because as I send my daughters out into the world, and my older one is a teenager, but as I look at my girls and I think about sending them out into the world, and I've got, my older one is a teenager who, is in high school, and we're not that far away from college. There's our scary things that come up with that. It's sending our young girls out, our young women out into the world. And which is why I feel
because of the boys and the men.
Right, because of the boys and the men. Exactly. And there was that whole internet debate recently that just kind of blew up about, would you rather be alone in the woods, with a man or with a bear? And so many women said a bear. And I thought, this is why the work that you're doing around advocating for our boys and raising them, as you said, emotionally with emotional intelligence is so important. You also talk a lot about this bigger goal, this bigger vision of having a more peaceful world and doing that one boy at a time. Can you talk about that a little bit? How does it get bigger?
Yeah, I mean, my business mission is to create a more peaceful world, one sweet boy at a time. And part of the reason that I make that my mission is because when we are parenting young boys who are struggling with hard behaviors that scare us and the people around us, we tend to go to a place of worry. We fast forward, right? They're going to be the next school shooter or the rapist behind the dumpster or whatever it is. And it's a terrifying place to be. So if I can turn that around and say, hey, your kid's only 5, 7, 9, 10, whatever. Let's get in there now when he's young and he's home and turn things around so that we don't have to worry about those things, so that he can go out and be protecting against those people rather than being those people.
Yeah.
So part of it is just about empowering us as parents of boys to realize that the work that we're doing in our homes is actually political. It's going to have an effect not just on us and the siblings in the home, but it has ripples, right? So it's the school community or a faith-based community if you're a part of one, or whatever kind of communities you're part of. And it just ripples out into the world of politics. I mean, we can look at the global stage right now. There are wars raging around the globe. There are many cities. We talked before this that I was just the victim of a violent crime. Violent crime is certainly up in California. I don't know, or in my hometown of California at least. So the personal, what happens inside of our homes, has an effect on the bigger world. So yeah, so I just kind of put it in that perspective.
Yeah, which I think is so I mean, it's a lovely way to think of it. I think it also can be really empowering to think about, intimidating maybe, but empowering to think about the fact that what we're doing in our homes can have that bigger impact out in the world.
Right. And there's also, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just say there's also this idea, I think that's really important, that we learn to be able to separate our boys' behaviors from who they are. And that doesn't mean that we let their behaviors go. And we don't need to help them move beyond them to better behaviors. But it does mean that we can consistently keep our eye on the target of love and connection and goodness, because really only from that place will they be able to change. Like, I've never met anybody in my life that was really able to change from a place of being criticized or shamed or punished. It's just not how people change.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
need people to believe in them. We need people to believe in us.
It strikes me that I hear a lot of people say, well, I raised my daughter and my son. I try to raise them the same. We don't, right? It's impossible to parent any two children identically. But I definitely see, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, that in schools and in families, our boys their misbehavior, even when it might match a girl's misbehavior, or unwanted behavior, or how, whatever, however you want to phrase that, we respond differently culturally.
Yes, that's why I make the points that I make in my business. Absolutely, we respond different. People say, well, why just boys? Why do you focus on boys? That's not fair, or that's discriminatory. I get a lot of negative feedback, but it's not about the biology. I'm not looking at the biology. I don't care where your child is on the gender spectrum. I have people in my community who have trans boys, right? But they're walking around in the world as a boy, right? People are perceiving them as boys, and we treat boys differently than we treat girls. We do not have the patience. We tend to act, we don't have patience for their emotions. We don't create space for their emotions, whereas we create much more space. We're much more comfortable holding space for our girls' feelings.
Mm-hmm.
If they have a tiff with a friend at school, for example, and somebody's crying, we don't shame them. We tend to comfort them, put an arm around them, help them negotiate, repair, mend. That's not the case with the boy. A boy who cries, wow, depending on his age, but let's say if he's older than 2 or 3, he's
Mm-hmm.
very likely going to be shamed for that. And
Yeah.
so we tend to ask the question when our girls are struggling, what's going on here? Like, what happened? What led her to be upset or to act out in X way or Y way? Whereas with our boys, we ask a very different question, and that question is, what's wrong with him? What did he do? What's wrong with him?
Mm-hmm.
He is guilty before a trial, right? He has not, there's no presumed innocence.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So going back, as you said, we do tend to shame these boys and handle it in such a different way. I love that you pointed out that we often ask what's wrong with them, what's wrong with him, as opposed to the way that we handle it with girls. So how do we start, both in our families and sort of on a broader perspective, how do we start to shift that and advocate for our boys while also managing behavior that isn't okay?
So I think we start in our families. I think I don't focus on schools. I focus on supporting parents to support their children's teachers, to support the child. But I know that teachers are, underpaid and overworked and all of that. I do want to say that the suggestions that I give parents are always very supportive of teachers and acknowledging of how hard they work and that we have the same goals in terms of we want the child to thrive. And
Mhm.
oftentimes what I'm teaching parents to teach the teachers or to discuss with the teachers is little ways that they can connect with the child throughout the day. And everything that I teach parents at home also is just infused with connection. It's all about how do we preserve our boys' ability to feel? Because what happens essentially is these children, they're moving through the world and stuff happens, right? They're playing with a sibling and the sibling comes and knocks down their Lego set and they get mad, right? They're hurt. The thing is destroyed. They spent 2 hours building it or 15 minutes building it or whatever, and they're upset. And maybe they hit the sibling. And then we hear the kerfuffle in the other room, right? And we come running in, and a lot of times we see the other child is hurt or crying, and we see the guilty face on our I don't know, on this boy's face, the guilty expression on this boy's face, and we punish or we shame. Why did you hit your brother? And we don't look at the context. Now, I don't mean to say, okay, it's okay for him to hit his brother. That's not the message. But the point is, there are feelings there because he was slighted in a particular way. He was hurt in a particular way. And if we don't dive a little bit deeper, then he doesn't ever have the opportunity to express those feelings and heal from the hurt. And what happens when we don't heal from the hurt is that I think of it as like sedimentary rock on the beach, right? Sometimes you're on a beach and you can see like the layers of the rock or the
Mhm.
sand that turns into rock. And that's kind of what happens to our feelings is like if we're not able to express them, if this little boy, his Legos got knocked over and then he got called out in school and he called on in school, he didn't know the answer. Um, you know, mom went away on a business trip and he was scared that she wouldn't come back because he was little, and that's a normal fear to have, right? Whatever it is, it's not necessarily that even something was done wrong, like the mom should have stayed home or something like that, but things happen and feelings happen. And like I said, if they don't have a place to come out, in other words, if there's no loving adult who can be attentive and allow the child to feel, and instead we're trying to cap those feelings, or worse, we're punishing and shaming and blaming, and adding to the hard feelings, then they harden like that sedimentary rock. They harden and then become behavior patterns. And then we see the aggression, go through the roof, and the behaviors get worse.
Yeah.
So really we need to focus on, I think that like the real crux of the work here is preserving our boys' ability to feel, and not just anger. That's kind of what's left. That's why when you ask a woman, would she rather be in the woods with the bear or a man, that many will choose the bear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But if we look at our little boys and we don't shut down when they're expressing what we've boxed as feminine feelings, right? Maybe they feel left out, maybe they feel hurt, disappointed, sad. And we tend to brush, oh, it's no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Or worse, man up, whatever. But we are not holding space for them. And so they are trapped. We're trapping them in a box with their feelings that harden into behavior patterns. And then we're upset at them that we don't want to go with them into the woods because they're such horrible people.
Right. I mean, to that point, like I heard somebody say once, maybe it was you, I can't remember. It was a number of years ago, but I heard somebody say, that for our adult men, the only acceptable emotion that they're left with is anger.
That's right.
Which is, and not only are they left with anger, but then they're also not given healthy ways to manage that anger. They're
That's
just
right.
left with this big explosive
Right.
feeling.
Right. So we have this opportunity with our boys, like mostly, I get parents who have little boys who are struggling with aggression. And one of the first things we talk about is how we have to work on these parents' fears, right? So both fear of the child and fear for the child. Because as long as he's feeling our fear, he's not going to be able to change, and we're not going to be able to help him change.
Yeah. I hear that we need to create that space for them to still have those feelings, and yet in my own work, and whether, it's parents with daughters or sons, I hear a lot of parents say, I was never given space for my feelings. And I don't know how to do that. I know we all as parent coaches talk about that and teach that maybe a little bit differently, but I'd love to hear, Tosha, how do you help the parents who are saying, I hear you, I hear that my son needs that space, and I don't know how to do it?
Yeah. So I want to share a story about a parent who I was working with today, who I've been working with for a while, and she's done amazing work. So she has really transformed her boy's behavior in a way that the aggression shows up very rarely, maybe every couple of months. But anyway, she had a couple of days alone with him and his little brother. And she was with them at the library, and they were, hitting each other and screaming, and she was trying to get them out and in the car, and she was being viewed through the glass, right? She called it the walk of shame, having to get them from the library bathroom where she was trying to sort of hide out and help them, through the library, out in the parking lot, and then the library has a glass wall, right? So she's feeling like there was this walk of shame, and she was having to sort of be witnessed. And she said, I just lost it. I was screaming at them, and I was so upset, and I said things that I wish I could take back. And I said to her a couple of things. Well, the main thing that I said to her is that it's not your fault, right? We are asked to parent, which is a full-time, 24/7, emotionally intense, physically intense job.
Yeah.
As a sort of add-on to our life that was already full before we became a parent, right? And we're not given extra support. So the ask is too big. It's an impossible ask. So try to lift some of the shame and know that you did the best that you could. You did the best that you could.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to tell another story because it connects back. So we continued to talk for a while, and she shared how in that scenario she actually had called her husband because she needed an anchor. She needed somebody to just help her calm down and be present so she could go back to her kids. Then she told me that, I was talking about sort of the importance of community and us supporting each other. And she said, she does have neighbors, but they don't really reach out to each other in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a group of them whose husbands were going away on a river rafting trip for 10 days. And they were all freaking out about being alone with their young kids. And I said, well, I wonder if this is kind of an opportunity. Like, what if you reached out to them and said, hey, when my husband was just gone, this thing happened. Right? I felt alone. I was overwhelmed. And ultimately, because I was alone and overwhelmed, I acted in ways that I really am feeling ashamed of, and I'm not happy with myself. And so I just wanted to say, like, if you guys are feeling at the end of your ropes and you need help while your husbands are away, please text me, please reach out. And it's this act of like building community to break the sense of isolation that we're the only one, and to bring the shame out into the light because it can't survive there, right? Brene Brown talks about that.
Yeah.
That really helps. And so like there's some simple things like that we can do that kind of sets the healing journey in motion.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's not necessarily the deep work, but breaking the isolation is a key piece of it. I think the next piece for me is the practice of listening partnerships. And this is something that we write about in our book, Listen, that I teach about in my community, that I use in my own life to get through hard times, including now with with this crime that happened and the trauma as a result of it. So really all it is an exchange of I don't want to call it listening time, but basically we would take some time, like if you and I were going to be listening partners, and we don't have to be professionals in any sense. It could just be two parents or whoever. And we basically set a timer. I listen to you for a certain amount of time, and you then we switch and you listen to me for a certain amount of time. But the way that we listen is very different than if we went out for coffee, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm the listener, I'm not giving you advice. I am not judging you. I am basically holding the thought that you are brilliant and you're going to find your way. Like I am trusting that you've got this. And it's an amazing practice. One, because when we're being listened to, we're able to feel those feelings that most of us didn't have somebody who could listen to us when we were little. So we've got a lot of pent up feelings in there. So we get to get those out. But there's another side effect that I think people don't realize, which is that even when we're struggling, we have the ability to help others, and that lifts our confidence, right? So even if I'm just, even if this woman I spoke to earlier today, she had this situation that she feels horrible about, she can have a listening partnership with somebody, and she can cry and she can scream about how she feels like she hates her kid and it's just so hard and she can't do it anymore, and all of these feelings that come up, right? She doesn't really hate her kid, she loves her kid and she does amazing with him, but these are feelings that we all have as parents.
Sure.
So yeah, so she can feel those and heal, and she also gets to be present to allow somebody else to do the same. And that's giving them a gift that they wouldn't have otherwise. So it's a huge confidence builder.
Yeah. And not just that, but it strikes me as such a gift of, I mean, when we give of our time and we give of our hearts and we give of our sort of that willingness to absorb a little bit to other people, that's an incredible gift. But as you're describing it, it's also letting out or giving us a space to start processing those feelings that we weren't taught to process
Right.
when we were young. And so when we do that, and I love your book, Listen, that you wrote with Patty Whipler. And I've actually taken a course from Patty that was lovely. But then how do we start to use, we build our own communities, our own support. Then when we look at our sons, have you just seen that sort of naturally then translate from parent to child? Or do you teach additional skills to help the parent in those moments when now, my son is, this to go back to that story that you shared, the lady with the two kids who are screaming and hitting each other in the library, and she's just going, oh my God, what do I do? How would that look different if she had been able in that moment to utilize some of those skills?
So it's interesting. For me, how I want that situation to look different is more about how the people around her react or respond, because and we talk about this in our community too. One of the things we do weekly is focus on like, how can we support another parent, right? How can we appreciate another parent? How can we support another parent? Because if just one person in that library had even come up to her and said, I get it, I have so been there, that feeling of judgment would have lessened enough, probably, for her to not have gone over the edge that she went over.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they could have said, hey, can I help you? Can I walk out to the, would it be helpful if I walked out to the car with you? Right? If somebody's got a handful of groceries, or they're juggling a bunch of stuff and they're trying to open a door, our tendency is like we go and we open the door for them and help them through.
Yeah.
And essentially that's what was happening. Her hands were full. She was like overflowing with kids and all of their emotions, and she was by herself, and there were a lot of people watching. And so sometimes we don't feel comfortable stepping in a big way, but like I said, even just a word of I've been there, or if there's anything I can do, I'm happy to help,
Yeah.
kind of a thing, just to make them feel like they're not alone. Because ultimately, like when she told her friends about this afterwards, what did they say? They said, oh man, like we have all experienced situations like that. Like they
Yeah.
weren't judging you, like they've all been there. But whether or not that's true, we'll never know if they were judging or not. But the feeling is of judgment. That's where we go. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what the reality is. If we're feeling that, then we're not going to be on our best behavior. So, I mean, that's one way that it could have looked different from the outside. I actually think she did an amazing job, all things considered.
Yeah.
Um, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that idea that you just shared. I feel like I almost want to shout that to the rooftops, that, we often think about what could that parent have done differently? Like if she could have tapped into her, higher thinking skills or calmed herself down. Like we often put the focus there.
Right.
I love, though, that what you said is the way that whole situation could have unfolded differently is if the community around her had responded differently, or with support, or just an I got you, mama, anything.
Right.
And that I think is forgotten. And we parent in such little isolated pods. And so whether you're raising boys or girls, from my perspective, Tosha, if people walk away from our conversation today with one idea, it should be that. Like, how can you transform situations like that with a word of support, an offer of support, rather than, man, that wouldn't happen to me because I could do that differently, or I could do that better, right? That space of judgment that we go to so quickly.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think about like on an airplane. Think about, everyone's been on an airplane where there's like a baby crying or a toddler not wanting to put their seatbelt on or something like that. And it's always striking to me the difference in reactions from between people who have had kids and had to transport them on a plane
Uh-huh.
versus people who have not. And I think like there's also a real cultural difference. I mean, we're both in the US, right? You're in the US?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's a very much, do it on your own kind of culture. So I used to travel, my husband's from another culture and another country, and we used to go there. Well, we still go there regularly, but I used to go by myself with the three boys. And there were two legs of the trip. The first one was from San Francisco, to someplace on the East Coast, and then it was international. And the trip with the three boys under 5 from San Francisco to Newark or wherever it was hellish.
Yeah.
Right? People would get mad at me. I was too slow. My kid was this, like whatever. It was just like whatever I did, I couldn't do it right.
Right.
When I got on the international flight, it was like it felt like the whole plane was parenting with me. It didn't matter that it was like another 10 hours or whatever it was, because I could give my baby to another person on the plane and go pee, right?
Uh-huh.
Or if somebody would even see that like one of the kids was restless and they'd come and say, play with them or pay attention to them or talk to them. So a lot of it's cultural, which just tells me that we can learn.
Yes.
Like we can be different. It doesn't have to be the way that it is here.
Yeah. We can do better.
We can do better.
We
Yeah.
can do better. Yeah. Yeah. That you're right. That cross-country trip is terrible.
Yeah.
And that stark contrast between sort of when you've got folks from other cultures, international flight, that there is a different attitude towards it. To circle back briefly to some of the behaviors that we see coming up in boys that creates that fear that we've been talking about, right? Aggression, hitting, kicking, where the anger is the or at least it looks like anger being expressed, right? It may be other emotions that are under the surface, but it looks like anger to us. And we get scared. What do you see as some of the common mistakes that parents make in dealing with that? And what do we as parents, what can we understand better to manage that better?
Yeah, I think like what's really missing, like the main thing that's missing is kind of a deeper understanding of what's going on. And I think the simplest way that I put it is, generally speaking, aggression is fear in disguise. And I think that that's just a really simple way for us to remember that our children need empathy. Right? Because it's really hard to empathize with a child if you're seeing him as aggressive or mean or a bully or something like that. But if you see a scared child, your tendency is to move towards him and give him the help that he needs.
Yeah.
So if we can remember that there's fear very likely driving whatever, the biting or the hitting or the spitting or the kicking or the swearing or the whatever it is, then it allows us more easily to focus on the connection with the child and separate him from his behavior. Because ultimately, what his brain needs us to do is to help it feel safe. And we can only do that through connection, and that connection might be through play. It might be it can be, it can be through laughter, it could be through play, it could be through time with him, it could be through a limit that needs setting, whatever it is. But his brain needs to feel safe enough for him to get out of the emotional part of it and into the thinking part of it, essentially. Yeah. So I think that's like the main thing that I would say is remember that there's fear underlying the aggression.
Yeah. Yeah, because what a powerful way, when you're looking at a child who's behaving in a way that you're like, oh, this isn't good. I like that you say to see him as a scared little boy,
Yeah,
as opposed to the monster in the woods, right?
absolutely.
Which is where our brain goes. I know in the work that you do, you have so many tools and so many frameworks that you share with your clients in your community, but you do teach a 5-step process for helping stop aggression. As we kind of wrap up today, can you share that framework with us a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. If I have to remember my steps, I'm always like, what are the 5? How do I put them into 5? So yeah, the first one is what I call setting yourself up for success, which is the simplest way to put it. It's like if you were trying to diet or lose weight, what would you need to do to give you a greater chance of succeeding? So if your freezer is stuffed with ice cream and your not cabinet, what's it called? cupboard
Oh, your
is,
pantry. Yeah.
yeah, if pantry is like full of cookies or something, well, probably you want to get rid of those because the temptation is likely to be too strong, right? So that first bit is really about what needs to be done in your environment. Are there people you need to tell, that type of a thing. So setting yourself, and it also has to do with the emotional piece that we've been talking about. Now it's kind of misleading, I might even say, to say there's sort of like a 5-step practice because it's not linear. It's kind of like wiggly wobbly all over the place,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't want parents to think, okay, I have to get myself in what I call good enough parenting shape before I can do anything else. It's both and. But that first step includes that. If you're incredibly triggered or you're scared of him or you're scared about his future, that's the place that you have to start because like I said, the energy you bring to parenting him is going to have a huge influence on him. So if a parent is in that place, like I will first start to focus with them on that, whether it's through listening partnerships or some other modality that they use to heal. Are they triggered by it because they're having, flashbacks to abuse from the past? I mean, there are many things that could be going on, or they have been triggered by it because they're worried about what he's going to be like in the future because they're watching the news. But we want to sort of look at what's really going on. So that first step is setting yourself up for success. The second step is all about connection and just infusing connection. So as you know, because you've read Listen, I teach a practice called special time, and at the end I'll tell parents how they can dive into this if it's new to them, or maybe they've let go of the practice and they want to get back into it. But essentially it's a unique kind of one-on-one time designed to flip on its head kind of our children's day-to-day life, which is mostly, for most of us, not everybody, but for most of our kids, it's about big people telling them what to do and how to do it or what not to do, whether it's school or sports or hobbies or meals or clothing or whatever. There's a lot of no, 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 don't do this. It's time to do this. Get your backpack on. It's like we're running the world.
Right. Right.
And what special time does is allow us to flip that on its head and give them a few minutes, a half an hour, whatever it is, for them to run the world. And it's beautiful. It just builds connection. Parents love it. Kids love it. There's lots of laughter that happens. Oftentimes it's a real window into their world. We get to learn lots of things about them that we wouldn't otherwise, because even parents often say, well, I spend a lot of time with my kid. Yes, great. Keep doing that. And I just want you to think about who's orchestrating that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Who's choosing what you're doing, when you're doing it, how you're doing it, for how long you're doing it, all of those things. So we want to infuse connection. Special time isn't the only thing to do, but it's one of the things to do.
Yeah.
In a
special time I've seen, because I promote that as well. We talk about it in positive discipline, and of course in the work that that you and that Patty does. And I have seen families transform almost completely with only that tool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's
I see it all the time.
Yep. Yeah.
All the time. It's amazing. It's amazing what the brain does when it feels connected.
Yeah.
To a loving adult versus what that child's brain does when it does not feel connected.
Totally.
Yeah. Yes, I too have seen families just turn around. Yeah, that's why I'm excited to share at the end the resource that I have with parents, because people do it. It's free, and like they're like, wow,
yes,
this has really changed the dynamic in our family.
Yeah,
it's that powerful.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's the second step. The third step that I usually take parents through is paying attention to when the aggression happens, because mostly I get parents coming to me who feel overwhelmed. They feel like it's happening out of the blue, it's happening all the time, and that's generally not true. There's always some kind of pattern. And when we can sense what the patterns are and we can identify what those patterns are, then we are much more empowered to make a plan for how to deal with it. So it's an important step that I think a lot of people don't take. And part of that step also is noticing when things are going well. because when we've got a kid who's really struggling in big ways, and aggression is struggling in a big way, and it is something that we do need to pay attention to because it generally doesn't go away on its own. You know, when we've got kids who are struggling that way, we feel underwater. And so to notice the good times helps. Oh,
Yes.
you know, he said thank you, or oh, he gave his brother a hug, or shared his toy with his brother, or you know, wow, dinner time was really peaceful tonight, or whatever it is. We tend to not notice that. I mean, our brain definitely has a negativity bias, and we definitely have a negativity bias towards ourselves, right? We tend to
Yes.
notice everything that we do wrong
Yes.
versus what we
Yes.
do right as a parent. So
Yes.
that's important too.
I love that, because what we focus on actually grows.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's that. And then we move into sort of the down and dirty of setting loving limits. Limits, especially when you've got hard behaviors like aggression, are important. It is our job, as I see it, to keep everybody safe and to keep things from being broken. So we need to use loving limits to do that. And then the last step is about using play strategically. And that's always sort of like, what, for parents? Because they're like, play with aggression, but play can actually be a great antidote.
Yeah.
It can be a great antidote. Yeah.
Well, and our children's brains are wired for play, right? That's how they learn.
All of our brains are wired for play.
Yes. Yeah. I certainly
We just forget how to do it.
We do. And yet when I settle back into it, whether it's with my kids or play that I think of as play now, yeah, everything, all the systems calm down, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Love
absolutely.
it.
Yeah, because laughter, I mean, what better way to connect with somebody than through laughter?
Totally. Tasha, we could talk for hours. I mean, you have so much wisdom, and, you know, as I said at the beginning of this, your mission in the world resonates so deeply with me. I don't have the privilege of being the parent of a boy, but I am I'm an aunt of my brother-in-law and sister-in-law have a son. You know, obviously many of my dear friends have sons. There are boys that are near and dear to my heart. And I want the world to be safe for my girls. So I just love what you're doing. And I find myself just wanting to talk more, but in the interest of time, we will wrap it up there. You mentioned, as we were talking about special time, that you have a freebie that people can get access to that by itself can help make a huge difference. So talk a little bit about that and where parents can get that.
Yes. So if you go to my website, parentingboyspeacefully.com/reconnect, or just go to parentingboyspeacefully.com and you'll see a little link on the very top there. It will lead you to my 10-day reconnect. It's called Parenting Boys Peacefully, a 10-day reconnect. And essentially I walk you through over 10 days, the practice of special time. And I lead you into it really slowly. I know you're busy. I know you've got a lot on your plate. I don't ever teach or ask you to do anything that isn't absolutely necessary. And the whole thing takes like 10 to 15 minutes a day for 10 days, including reading the email or watching the little short video that I sent. So it's super, super easy, super doable for any parent in any parenting situation. And I would encourage anybody who's struggling with their sweet boy to head over there so you can see more of his sweetness more often. I
love that. And we will make sure that that link is also in our show notes for anybody that, you know, if you're driving right now and you can't jot it down, it will be available for you on theheartfulparent.com. You can find that link so that you can connect with Tosha. I get Tosha's emails. They're fabulous. She's got a lot of amazing programs and offerings, especially geared towards you parents of our sweet boys. So I'm so grateful to be able to share your work and your mission with the world. Tosha, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for helping me spread the word and advocate for our sweet boys.
Yeah, and together we can, with this type of work, as you said, build a more peaceful world.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, everyone. I hope that you got as much out of that conversation as I did. I think Tosha just sends such a beautiful message and energy out into the world. And I really love it. And I love the idea that we can change the world in the way that we raise our children. And that if we can start thinking of our boys as more wholehearted individuals, it serves them, it serves us as their mamas and daddas, it serves our girls, it serves the world as a whole. And I just love the alignment that Tosha and I have in the belief that we really can build a more peaceful world in the way that we parent our kids. So would love to know your thoughts, feelings. Did this resonate with you? Are you the parent of a mama and this still really, struck a chord with you? Email me, let me know. I'd, as always, love to hear what you think about what we're putting on the podcast. And I will just say that we've got good stuff coming in the months to come. So keep staying tuned. I appreciate you. See you next week.